Okay, welcome everybody to that sixth National PD session for 2024. Today, I'll be co-presenting with Renee, National Clinical Excellence Manager, and I'm Mary, National Pediatric Clinical Lead for our organisation, and we will be talking about goal setting for success. So hopefully we get to answer a few questions about goal setting and we share some practical tips that makes the whole process a little bit easier or smoother or less effortful for you guys after today. So before we get started, I just want to start by acknowledging country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We acknowledge all traditional custodians of the lands on which we gathered today as well. For myself, it is the Awabakal people in Newcastle. And we pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Islander peoples here today. Okay, goal setting for success. Before we start, we're going to put you guys to work a little bit. I'll pop a link in the chat. If you can all just complete this very short survey. We're keen to understand how everybody's feeling in terms of confidence level with goal setting. Is that something that you find easy? Is that something you find effortful and a little bit dreadful, or is that running pretty smoothly? So we'll give you a minute to complete that link. If someone can just give me a thumbs up that the link worked, that would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks, guys. I forgot to mention we'll have Ellie as well co-facilitating and monitoring the chat, guys, as I just can't talk and monitor the chat at the same time. That is unfortunately not a good skill of mine. While you all complete this very short two question survey, 30 seconds, we might just look at, there you go, we might just look at the learning outcomes for today. So we're aiming to understand why goals are important. We'll talk about differentiating NDIS goals and therapy goals and understand how they relate to one another. We'll talk about the MDT contribution to goal setting, so how different disciplines can contribute to the goal setting process. We will, of course, talk about SMART formulations for therapy goal. A good goal setting session without talking about SMART goals would not be complete. We will look at selecting appropriate functional outcome measures, and we'll talk a little bit about the documentation associated with goal setting. And hopefully, if we have a bit of time, we'll take questions and potentially some case examples. But if you have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and Ellie will be monitoring that for us. All right, for those of you who just joined, there is a link in the chat if you want to please complete that quick survey. That would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you. All right, let's start. Why are goals important? Keen to hear you guys, so feel free to unmute yourself. It's going to be a lot more interesting if you participate then. It's just a bit of a monologue from Renee and I today. We're keen to hear your point of view and your ideas. Why do we set goals? Why is it important to set goals? Unmute yourself or use the chat. What do we all think?
So that informs our therapy direction.
Yeah, really good one. Informing the therapeutic process. Yeah.
It's a good way to track progress as well.
Yep, if we don't have a goal, it's very hard to track the progress.
Sarah has said to be transparent about expectations. I like that. That's really good, about expectation setting as well. How much can you achieve? Yep.
Nick says it keeps us interested as clinicians as well. It gives us something to work towards. I mean, I think it's human nature that we want to achieve, you know, to strive towards something and achieve outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Love it.
Nick says that the goals make our therapy useful and meaningful to participants. Yep.
Yeah, getting the buy-in into therapy, giving purpose to a therapy. Yep. Keeping us accountable during the plan period. Love it, Lucy. Good one. Absolutely. And self-efficacy for participants and practitioners. Absolutely. We will come back to that. Yes.
It's almost like
you.
Ali knew.
To recognize
Emily says,
win.
yeah, and I love that because I think that that's the thing that we forget about sometimes. Oh, we've got these big NDIS goals. Yeah. Sarah says it follows evidence-based practice.
I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. Well, I'm really glad to see that you guys have all very good reasons of why we should be setting goals. We have noted a few here. So if we break it down for different groups of people, for different populations, and let's pray that technology is on my side here. There you go. So in terms of why we set goals, why is it useful for the participants? I think it gives us a common language and a common understanding with the clinicians to know what we're going to be working on. It definitely helps to plan, prioritize, and focus on specific outcomes. A lot of the participants that we work with have needs for support in multiple areas. So setting goals help us to be centered and focused and prioritizing how we're going to be spending our time and how we'll be supporting participants. And the goal setting, that pace and goal achievement can definitely contribute to increasing confidence, self-esteem, and the sense of agency, which we will come back on a little bit later in this presentation. In terms of the clinicians, for you guys, once again, that common piece of language and understanding with the participants, but it's also what should be driving our therapeutic process. Without goals, we don't really know why we're doing therapy, basically. So it's the destination. And for those of you who have done PD with me before, that's an expression I use all of the time. If you are wanting to work towards something, but you don't know what's the destination, what's the end goal, it's much harder to get there efficiently. It's if I say, hey guys, come and visit me. I live in New South Wales. Like, will be a bit tricky, or it's going to take time for you guys to find me versus if I give you a very specific address for you to get to. It helps guiding the development of a very clear plan and using meaningful intervention. That is what should inform, or the goals should inform a clinical reasoning and supports the documentation process as well. And once again, we'll talk about the documentation process a little bit later today, but the goals should really be driving that documentation piece once again. As an organization, setting goals is important because that's basically our agreement on how we're going to be using the NDIS funding, and it's a requirement for us to maintain our NDIS registration. Probably not the most exciting reason, but definitely a valid one. We are regularly audited on randomly chosen files by NDIS, and we have to demonstrate that we meet our governance criteria. One of these criteria is that on all files where we have ongoing intervention, we should have a support plans with clearly outlined goals. So that is a good reason enough. If all of the other reasons are not sufficient, this is definitely one that should be enough so we can all keep working with our NDIS registration. And it contributes to a commitment as well at Ability Action Australia to provide high quality services to our participants. For the NDIS, the NDIS is definitely moving towards an outcome-based model in the near-ish future. That is something that is being talked about more and more in the recent communication. So having a robust goal-setting process and skills in place will be essential for participants to obtain funding in the future and for service providers like yourselves to maintain a registration. So once again, something that is worth considering. And I know we have an outcome project that we are working on at the moment, with which we'll touch on a little bit later in this presentation. Okay, next question for you guys. Once again, feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat. What are the differences between the NDIS goals and the therapy goals? I feel like sometimes we get a little bit caught up with wanting to work towards goals and we tend to just say goals, but when we say, oh, we're working towards the goals, we should refer to therapy goals, but the document that NDIS provides to us is NDIS goals. What are the differences between those NDIS goals that are provided in the NDIS plan and our therapy goals, or SMART goals, if you prefer? Yes, go for it. I feel like a teacher. Yes, Rana.
I think NDIS goals are very broad stated. So I'd like to be able to work on my emotional regulation skills. And then the therapy goals will then dig into that emotional regulation and be like, okay, so what did we actually what did we actually do in the sessions to be able to achieve that? And to be honest, I've got a participant who one of his personal goals is staying at school, nothing to do with emotional regulation as such, but that's his therapy goal, to stay at school and to be able to get a good education. So yeah.
I love this. I think you're on the right track, and yeah, NDIS goals are generally much broader, much more general, as our therapy goals will be targeting something much more specific. Yeah, very good one. What else? There's quite a few differences.
Brittany has said, similarly, the NDIS goals are the broader goals. It's just moving as I read it, of course. The broader goals in the person's life and the therapy goals are very specific. And Noah's made the comment that therapy goals should relate back to the NDIS goals. Very good call out. The NDIS goals are more general, relate to the participant wants to achieve with all of their supports. And that's actually a really good point too, Noah, that we may only be playing, our therapy goal might just be one small part of all of the therapy goals or support goals that are needed in order to achieve that bigger goal. Sarah's given an example of how a specific goal leads into a broader goal. Simon has also added that NDIS goals are for the duration of the plan and based on what the participant and their supports are working broadly towards, whereas therapy goals should relate to those but can be more individualized, and I'm going to add specific there as well because that sort of has come through in the other comments. Therapy goals are SMART, Danielle says. Yes, they are, and in more ways than one. Therapy goals work on supporting the participants to achieve their NDIS goals. Yes, beautiful. One step along the way. Therapy goals are especially important when teenagers are adjusting into adulthood. I love it, Harry. I'm sure they're important at lots of other times as well, but you absolutely, you're right. It is important then too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, let's have a look. There's quite a few. So we've already talked about the fact that NDIS goals are generally more broad versus therapy goals that are quite specific. The NDIS goals, like Renee mentioned, will most generally, or in the pediatric space anyway, be based on a developmental approach or be targeting an area of function. Like we want little Johnny to develop his emotional regulation skills, versus a therapy goal is going to be very SMART, very specific, targeted to a context or targeted to a specific behavior. Once again, we mentioned more of a developmental approach normally, especially in the ped space, versus our therapy goals should have that function and goal rather than just developing milestones or developing function. For those of you who are familiar with the NDIS goal or the NDIS plans, a lot of the time we'll see multiple goals on the NDIS plan, so up to 7 or 8 at times, as when we work with a participant, we'll typically have fewer goals, so probably 1, 2, or 3 at a time it is more realistic to increase our chances to achieve that goal. The process of establishing these goals a little bit different as well. So for the NDIS goals, it's usually established by the participant and or the plan nominee, and the process will be guided by the LAC or the planner, as the therapy goals should be really the result of that collaborative process between ourselves and the care team and the participant or their plan nominee once again. I think it's Simon who mentioned that the goals were fixed for the plan period in terms of the NDIS goals. Absolutely true. As for therapy goals, we should review them quite regularly during the plan period, as this is what's informing our therapeutic process. So we need to make sure that we are on the right track and to monitor how we're going. The NDIS goals will therefore be more of a long-term sort of project as our therapy goals to be efficient and to be improving that sense of self-efficacy that Ellie was talking about earlier. We should probably focus on shorter or medium-term goals at most, so we are able to see the end game. The goal is feeling achievable within a short period of time. And the way I personally conceptualize it, for those of you who are used to my workshops, I think very visually. So an image is worth 1,000 words. I see the NDIS goals very much like the top of the staircase versus the therapy goals are gradually going up the steps. And
Mary, just while you go to the next slide, I was just going to say another comment came in on the chat, which was Lucy saying that progress towards the NDIS goals can determine funding received, but the therapy goals less so. But I think that's also where we actually want to be demonstrating how each of those therapy goals fit into this progress towards the NDIS goal.
Yeah, and if we're able to relate our therapy goals well to the NDIS goals, then progress towards a therapy goal could lead to increased funding as well if we're well articulate with our reports. So, but good comment, Lucy, to think of the funding in the long run. Absolutely. So this is probably how I personally conceptualize NDIS goals. So the participant is here and the NDIS plan is looking at the end result. It's telling us what we're hoping to achieve for the participant at a very big picture level. As when I conceptualize my therapy goals, I probably put a big focus or a lot of emphasis on the process that will lead to achieving the end goals. So my therapy goals will probably end up being much smaller steps that do feel achievable, that I will review quite often, and we're going to end up at a similar place as the NDIS goal, but we're probably focusing a little bit more on the process rather than just the end result. Yeah, love it, guys. I'm glad you guys like this visual. I might print it on a PDF and make it available for those of you who would like to have that that tool to support your goal setting or conversations that you may have with participants. So glad that it's hitting the mark for other people than myself. Now that we've reflected on NDIS goals and therapy goals, let's do a little exercise. Let's practice, and let's take maybe goal number 1 to practice for now, and I'll leave goal number 2 for you guys to do as a team, maybe during your next team meeting or over the next couple weeks. So if in a plan you were to read NDIS goals along the lines of, you know, Big John will increase independence with their self-care tasks during the morning routines, or it could be Little Johnny if you're working in the ped space, no problem at all. What type of therapy goals could you fit or could you relate to that NDIS goals? And based on your discipline, you can picture whatever Big John or whatever Little Johnny you want. We're being quite vague on purpose here, but use the chat and try to write a therapy goal or a SMART goal for us that could be sitting under or relating to that NDIS goal about independence with self-care tasks during the morning routine. Keen to hear a few examples. And if you want to write your discipline as well, that would be fantastic. So we can have a bit of a look on that one.
Okay, great one coming in, written in the SMART format. I'm just going to jump to the crux of it, which is that they'll be able to independently put away his pajamas and make his bed once per week. And there's some good timeframes and measurements around that in that goal as well. Thanks, Danielle.
Love it.
Yep, so be able to brush his teeth at least 5 times or mornings a week with no verbal prompting, and it's going to be tracked on a self-report, self-care task. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, self-report, sorry. Kaylin, I know you're an EP, so he's saying the participant will be independently showering once per day in 3 months' time, indicating an improvement in independence in completing self-care tasks.
Yep, very good. Brushing teeth is a familiar one or recurring one. Zane's mentioning that little Johnny will be able to independently brush his teeth thoroughly for 2 minutes every morning for the entire week as measured by a daily log. You guys are absolutely champion. Why are we doing this workshop today? Well done. You have great ideas. Big John will follow the morning visual chart 5 days a week. Yeah, very good. Excellent. Feel free to add some more if you have other ideas. You guys have used some of my examples, but if I'm thinking of a different type of participant more in the physical disability space, we could think, for example, of within 3 weeks, the participant will independently make a cup of tea without spilling using a level indicator. As a bit of a personal note, my father-in-law is visually impaired, and that was one of his goals when he worked with an OT a long time ago. So that would improve his independence with self-care tasks during the morning routine. Love it, Noah. Definitely not a stretch. In 6 months' time, with speech pathology support, for John to request for support from his informal supports when getting ready in the morning, 75% of the time. Absolutely. So we could be targeting that communication piece to help with the independence. Well done. Yeah, we have some other examples come through. To increase the upper limb range of motion and control to be able to wash his own hair in 3 months' time. Fabulous. Love the diversity, guys. Well done. All right. I will leave number 2 around increasing productivity by engaging in part-time employment for you to do as a team if you wish so, a bit later next week. Just a little note on the MDT approach to goal setting. Really important to consider that multidisciplinary piece, to have that coordinated approach to care. We're definitely able to have different professionals contributing to one goal, but looking at it from a different lens to make sure that we are adding our specific discipline colors to the goal, while still being mindful of preventing duplication and not addressing the exact same thing in 2 different disciplines and doubling up on the funding that's being used for that therapy goal. It really helps with aligning our recommendations as well when you set goals from an MDT perspective, avoiding going in too many directions. If we have 2, 3, 4 professionals working with the same participants, making sure that we have that sort of overarching or general goal or broader goal that we are all aiming for, and then seeing what we can contribute as a specific discipline will prevent having 10 or 12 different goals, which can be completely overwhelming for the family if they're targeting all different areas, or for the participant. And obviously using support plans to document these goals make the process a lot more structured, a lot more coordinated, and facilitate that MDT piece. So as illustrated here, the lead clinician should be the one taking the lead on the support plan and leading that sort of goal setting process or the discussion with the participant or the plan nominee. So that is a direct collaboration. We would expect the lead clinician and the MDT team to then reflect on the priorities that were communicated by the participant and the plan nominee and come up with some goals target relating to their own discipline. And obviously we want to collaborate probably a little bit more indirectly with the other stakeholders that are not necessarily part of AAA, but still very important team members of the care team. Let's think about some goals. So I'm going to give you a PEDS example, and then I'll put you guys to work with an adult case. So, for example, one NDIS goal that we see a lot in pediatric NDIS plans is, for example, little Johnny will develop his emotional regulation skills. So very broad. From discussing as a team, or the lead clinician would have conversation with their family and come up with the priority that, you know, we're going to help little Johnny improve his emotional regulation by decreasing his physical aggression towards his mum during his morning routine. If we were to look at this goal or this priority for the family from an MDT lens, the OT could work towards achieving a better match between little Johnny's sensory preferences and needs and the environment and the routines. The speechies could probably work on improving communication between little Johnny and the people supporting him during his morning routine. Behavior support practitioners could definitely work to upskilling the family with recognizing escalation signs and suggesting regulation techniques, and EPs could work on supporting the emotional outlet via physical activities. All right, I'll give you another example, and I'd love for you guys to put your specific discipline lens in the chat. So if the NDIS goal was for the participant to access the local shopping centre to improve social and community participation. From different conversation with the participant, we would then discover that they want to attend the shopping centre because they'd love to meet at a coffee shop with a friend. So if it was a goal that the participant was saying is important to you, or if the clinician that's leading the case was coming with this priority from your discipline, how could you support this goal for the participant? And I'll read it again just so it's clear. So this participant wants to attend the shopping centre so they could meet up with a friend at the local coffee shop. So what could OTs do to help achieve this goal? What could physios do to help achieve this goal? What could psychs do? What could EPs do? Keen to have your suggestions in the chat. How do you feel you can contribute to this goal from your specific discipline? Or feel free to unmute yourself if that's your preferred method as well. I'm not too sure if answers are coming through the chat.
Not quite yet. It's quite hard to type such detailed answers, Mary. I'm being tested myself. I'm going to call mine out. I was saying as an OT that perhaps one of the things that I might want to work on in this space is working with the participant to develop some finance management or budgeting skills so that they're actually able to pay for their coffee when they attend. Noah has said for Speechy that looking at supports around social communication and building conversation skills. Yep. And yeah. Danielle has said participant will identify the route to the shopping centre on a mud map with his OT by the end of 2 weeks of therapy. Yep.
Fantastic.
Great. I was thinking about this goal, and from a physio perspective, I was thinking that perhaps they may need to have a look at community mobility. I'd love it if there's a physio out there that could be more specific for me on that goal or another relevant goal.
I can add to it.
Thanks, Harry. Yeah. That was Harry, wasn't it?
Will be, yes. The participant will be able to identify through the rate of exertion scale, working below level 4 of their exertion within most of the walk and take appropriate breaks in between the walk.
Love this. So working on that endurance piece for the walk to the shopping centre. Fantastic. Yep. Love it. From a psychology, I'm not too sure if we have psychologists on the line, but from a psychology perspective, let's pretend we have a very, very, very stressed participant that is freaking out a little bit at the idea of going to the shopping centre because there's lots of people.
So while our psychologists are thinking about that question, Sharon, who's one of our PBS practitioners, has said talk about change in the environment and how they will recognise and manage overstimulation.
Love it. There you go.
Zane has also said that within 12 months, Big Johnny will socially attend the local shops twice a week to see a friend via a mobility scooter. So there's an option as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it. You guys have really good ideas. Exposure therapy. Yeah, absolutely. So working towards that social exposition and management of anxiety, potentially. Yeah. And figuring out why they're overstimulated. very good. I can see we're already thinking about the goal leading to some assessments or some questions and driving the next steps of the process. So that's very, very good. Well done. All right.
I can think about a joint goal as well with OT and physios, with medication management to like lung diseases. OTs are very important in reminding and allowing the participant to take their medications on time before they walk.
Yeah, so there could be that sort of executive function piece of managing the morning routines and the step that comes prior to leaving the house to going to the shops. Yeah, absolutely. Or that occupational balance of, if that's a very effortful activity, maybe ensuring that we have good rest before some lower demand activities after going to the shops. Yeah. Very good. You guys have great ideas. I'll just keep going for the sake of this presentation as we have a fair bit of content to cover. I wanted to just touch on a few tools that are specifically designed to support goal setting. So one of the most popular one is probably the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, or well known as the COPEM. The Goal Attainment Scale, or the GAS goal, is another really well-known one. Autism Queensland has got a few different ones to support goal setting tools for adolescent and adults, family and autistic children. Kids That Go have really interesting self-care cards that support goal setting as well. PEGS is another goal setting tool, and at the OT conference last week was released the self-rating scale from Kids Link. So we'll just modify this one. I have really good news for you guys. You're going to get access to a modified version of that one. It's going to be updated on the internet in the next few weeks. So watch out for the next Aspire edition. You'll find that resource there. So very exciting. As you can see, some of these tools are probably focusing a little bit more on developing the goals, as other tools are focused a little bit more on measuring the goals. So they have differences between them. Some are more interview based, and some are a little bit more visual. So the level of language and the level of cognition is very different to use these tools, and some are more structured versus others that are quite flexible in how you use them in your approach. So nationally, we have access to the COPEM. That's one that's available online for all clinicians at AAA, and depending on your regions, you might have access to other tools locally as well. All right, we're tracking well. I'll hand over to Renee here for the next section.
Thank you, Mary. So in coming up, oh, sorry, is that slide changed? Thank you. So here we want to talk about goal formulation, and of course we will be this is our prompt to be talking about smarter goals. So as Mary said earlier, it's not really very easy to have a discussion around goal setting without covering this topic. So I'm sure you all feel very familiar with it, but I do think it is worth touching on. Mary, we were going to do a group reflection at this stage around people's understanding of smarter goals, but I think we've actually seen a lot of that in the chat. So we might just move on and keep going with it. So what we have here is a diagram representing the smarter goal, and I'm sure all of us are really familiar with SMART goals. And then obviously we have this additional aspect of the part at the end being evaluated and reviewed. So as we've sort of touched on already, all of our goals, our therapy goals, really need to be SMART goals so that we are actually able to measure them, able to demonstrate that progression with the goal. Sorry, Mary, I feel like I've got to ring a little bell. Like
we need a secret sign.
So specific is the first part of a SMART goal, and this is really absolutely the one word that says it all. It's about being really, really specific about what you are wanting to achieve, and that might be one very small part of what is the bigger NDIS goal. I often use the example of when I was working with people who were trying to return to work after an ABI, their goals were all around getting back to work, but we often had situations where people weren't even really able to function fully through the day. And so their goal actually might be to be able to get out of bed at the same time every day, which was one very small step towards being able to work. We weren't thinking about job seeking. We weren't thinking about whether or not they could do their job. We were just thinking about that very specific component of getting them prepared for it. So to do that, we want to really think about what it is that we're wanting to achieve and what's the first step in that. Reflect on who, what, when, where, why, individualizing it for our participant, obviously, trying to use action verbs rather than sort of more broad and vague terms such as understand, and really target the actions and the behaviours that you want to see increase or decrease. So, you know, depending upon what that goal is, obviously whether you're trying to promote something or trying to reduce the occurrence of it. I did skip a dot point there around saying to avoid referring to areas of function, general statements or vague descriptions, but I feel like we have covered that off a bit in the last 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like picturing a movie in your head, as you guys can imagine, that was probably my addition. If you're not able to see the outcome in your head, that's not tangible. That's probably not specific enough. If you're not able to imagine what success would look like, you're probably not at that specific level just yet.
It's a great way of thinking about it, Mary. Thank you. The next part, of course, is how we're going to measure it. And this is going to be, I mean, it's so important for us now. This is how we feel those wins, especially as someone called out earlier that for some of our participants, the wins are very small and we want to be able to celebrate them. So it's really important to have a good understanding at the start about how you're going to measure it so that you can see that progress. And because if you're feeling that win, your participant is also feeling that win. So we really want the goal to be specific and measurable so that they can actually understand what they're trying to achieve and how we're going to know that they achieved it. It's also going to be super important in the future when we're talking about outcomes. And I know that many of you will have in the recent roadshows have had the information about the outcomes project that Dorothy's running. Obviously, that's a big project looking at outcomes overall, but it all starts with really great goals at the start so that we have a way of measuring that and knowing what we achieve. So how is it that you will know that the goal is achieved? How are you going to measure that? And then what are the relevant outcome measures that you might want to use? And those outcome measures are not necessarily, and I think Mary's probably going to cover this a bit later, but we don't necessarily, they don't have to be big things. They can actually be quite small things that were small ways of measuring things. We just want it to be measurable. Achievable. So this is that the goal is actionable, attainable, achievable. And coming back to my example with my participants with ABI, if I had set that goal that within 3 months they were going to be working full time, we all would have gone home pretty desperately sad in 3 months' time because that was just not going to be achievable for them. What we wanted to do was set a goal that they could achieve, that was within their control, that they could actually action themselves and that they could see they were making progress towards. You also need to think about, can you reasonably make it happen? It might not be within your scope. So is it actually that somebody else needs to be involved with this goal? Is it best that sits with you? And if it's not really in your scope, what aspect of the broader NDIS goal is in your scope so that you can work on that and have that discussion with the participant. Obviously, to set realistic, achievable goals, we need to have a really good understanding of our participants' physical, sensory, cognitive, social, environmental sort of needs and barriers. So we need to be thinking about all of those things when we're setting the goal in order to make it achievable. And we want to avoid goals that are targeting same-age peers comparison, and this is probably particularly true in the PED space. But even with our adults, what we need to be doing is really comparing where they were to where they are now, or where they're going to be, so that they can really have that sense of their own achievement. And we're really focusing on their specific functioning. relevant. Again, I think we've really covered this pretty well, and people have really demonstrated their, their understanding of this in the answers that we've had in the chat. But we just need to be able to come back to, why is achieving this goal important, especially when you have a goal that is perhaps a bit separate to what the big NDIS goal is. You're looking at one small part of it. So being able to explain to a participant and bring them along for that journey as to how this piece of the puzzle is going to contribute to achieving the bigger goal. Is it meaningful to them? And this is where we come to their goals and their NDIS goals. Being able to relate that to them is really important, so that they understand that meaning. Avoiding goals that relate to standardized test items. So this might be about where our therapy intervention is purely about achieving a score on a test rather than actually working towards the function. And so although those tests might be important for us to measure the goal, what we're actually trying to do is achieve that function. Hence the next dot point, focus on function and participation. And that's, very much what the NDIS is looking for and what drives our participants as well. And really importantly, establishing the goals in partnership with your participant or their caregiver is ultra important. So, this is a bit that sometimes we find a bit difficult in terms of, participants might have quite broad goals, and being able to actually have that conversation with them and narrow it down for them is it can be tricky sometimes, but that's where we might benefit from using some of those goal setting tools, or just thinking about how we have that conversation of what's the first step that we need to take for your big goal. Okay, the goal needs to be timely or time limited. So we really need to think about how this is part of the measurement process. In what time frame are we actually going to be able to achieve this goal? So when do you anticipate that it will be achieved? What is the time frame in order to change the current situation and reach the goal? And really try to set a deadline on that. And I think that's really come through in the chat that people are doing that. So we're thinking 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. I would even say that probably when we are actually working with a participant and we have the dates in front of us, that we can even be, specific to that. And if we're working with them now, we want it, by the end of August, just so that we're all on the same page around that. And yeah, and that feeds into that piece around setting having that deadline, but avoiding those sort of generic statements like by discharge or by the end of the plan period.
Do we have time for the reflection, Renee?
I think so, because I think this is really important, and this is a bit that we get feedback about that people do find a bit hard. That thing about picking timeframes for the goals. So if anybody has some ideas around how they work to work that out, I'm sure everybody would love to hear from you. Emily has asked the question about the having access to a copy of the GAS, and I think that might be a regional response, Emily. I might come back to you separately on that. Yeah. So would people like to think about how you go about setting your timeframes for your goals?
From a physio perspective, I know some of it comes down to just clinical experience, but also sort of your knowledge of like, neuroplasticity or learning new skills. So you can't teach someone a new skill in 3 weeks. It's not going to be a skill that they remember for the rest of their life. So being aware of how long it takes someone to learn a new skill and transition from, I can't remember the exact term for it, but it's like you can do it, but you're not doing it well, to you're doing it well and you don't have to think about it. It's like unconscious performance or unconscious something. And sort of that transition between the two stages of you're consciously having to think and do and plan versus you can just do it.
Yep.
Yeah. We have a few answers.
Yeah,
we have a few answers in the chat that relates to what Sarah just mentioned, getting to know the participants, knowing their strengths and their challenges, and that should guide the goal setting period. Very good. considering the prognosis of disability as well. So are we aiming to improve or maintain or increase some skills? The historical outcomes for the participant can be helpful as well. A good one, Carissa, in terms of how quickly they've achieved previous goals, that could inform us on how they might achieve future goal, and consider other factors like fear, yellow flags, family environment, etc. And depend on the situation of the participant as well, and the context where we're working. Good one, Noah.
Yep.
Well done, team.
Yeah, and I think what's really come through there is what we all feel at different times, which is how long is a piece of string, and how long do we think this is going to take? And there is an element of sometimes we just have to learn something, and it's our own personal experience of working with participants that helps us to do that. But we do have these other bits of information that feed into that, and you know, as Hannah said, getting to know your participant, and then somebody else said, you know, understanding how Carissa's point around thinking about how quickly they achieved something else, and therefore how that might influence the next thing that they're going to do. I'm probably going to say it's not a perfect science, Mary, and it's something that we get better at as we go along.
Fully agree.
Yep. And absolutely seems reasonable to be talking to your team leaders and your supervisors and stuff around that if you're struggling with it a bit as well. Okay, smarter goal. So this is the final part where we actually evaluate the goal and review it. So along the way, are we actually readjusting that goal if we need to? Are we evaluating the progress that's been made? Are we continuing to check in that it is actually still a priority for the participant and caregiver? And this might be, you know, when things change for a participant, or sometimes, you know, other priorities introduce themselves, I guess, and then we find that we are not getting the traction on a goal that we are working on with them, and there might be reasons behind that. So just because we've set a goal at the start doesn't mean that we have to continue with it till it's completed if it becomes not the right goal for them. But also, if we are working and still working on that goal, and we get to the point where it's been achieved, how do we know it's achieved? We've actually evaluated that with them, so we've been checking in along the way, evaluating the progress until we've reached that measured point. And then the review then at that point is probably more about, well, what comes next and what is actually our second step along the way. So probably also a really important point that we have talked a lot about the goals for the participant, but often these goals will be targeted to other people around the participant as well. So we may actually have goals that are related to the family or caregiver, perhaps goals for the support workers in being able to understand how to work with the participant. We might have goals for teachers when we have a paediatric participant, or just anyone else in the participant's life who might be contributing to their support or participating in activities with them. So we do want to make sure that when we're setting that goal, we're identifying who it is that actually we are working with. And, you know, I think again in the chat, when we've done that, everybody's put, you know, targeted to the participant, and there's definitely then some other goals that might come in around that related to other people around them.
Good one. All right, outcome measures, big part of the goal setting process. So why do we need outcome measures? Basically, at the moment, we are undertaking a project to develop outcome measures for our service. So I've mentioned we have access to COPM. Some different regions have access to different tools locally, but we are looking at the outcome measure project in a broader capacity, and it's really exciting to see that so many of you have responded to Dorothy's questionnaire. So thank you so much for your ideas, and we will definitely look at the input you've provided and how we should measure what we should measure and how we should measure outcomes. So we're going to be thinking about, why do we need them? Why do we need to think about outcome measures? And I think we've highlighted this in the previous discussions, that we need to be able to monitor progress towards the goals. we need to evaluate if our intervention is effective or if we need, once again, to change approach slightly. And the right outcome measure can really instill the confidence and motivation in both the participant and the clinician. So then how do we choose the right outcome measure? That's probably the million-dollar question. We have to make sure that it is relevant to the goal. Sometimes we debate between a standardized outcome measure versus a more informal or a non-standardized outcome measure. We need to really think about the goals and making sure that we are measuring what we wrote in the goal and not just a score on a test. Has to be sensitive enough to detect the changes in the participants' functioning, and probably a good example of this for those of you who work with the Vineland, which would be most of the disciplines. Someone with intellectual disability, for example, in their domestic task subtest, is very unlikely to have significant changes as it's measured against typically developing same age peers, but you could do a very significant change in their daily functioning by increasing their independence, increasing their capacity. They would still be performing below same age peers, but their quality of life and their level of independence would have increased quite significantly. So we have to pick something that's sensitive enough to demonstrate the goal that we are establishing with the participant, I should say, not for. It needs to be specific enough for the context targeted. Once again, some of those standardized assessment tools are targeting a really, really broad context as our participants. Emotional regulation, for example, we might pick one specific transition during the day where we're hoping for them to be more regulated versus targeting their whole skill set. So picking an assessment tool or an outcome measure that will measure this is important. And as a secondary condition was something to keep in the back of our mind, going with the NDIS approved outcome measures is always a bit of a good route as well. I had a bit of a group reflection. We might skip that just for the sake of time today, but just some examples here. When we think about outcome measures, yes, formal assessment scores might be absolutely indicated if your goal relates specifically to that assessment tool. But sometimes those assessments that are standardized will not be the best way to go. So we could get creative and measure outcomes by thinking about how many repetitions a participant is able to do for a specific movement, or the intensity levels of a behavior, for example. Is the participant able versus unable, or the level of support that they need to achieve the goal? We could transform most goals into Likert scales where the participant could rate their own self-efficacy perception or their satisfaction or their performance. So, a good old 1 to 10 scale goes a long way for participants, and that's very easy for you to measure. Where are they at the beginning of the process, and where are we hoping to go, and where are we at the moment in the progression towards this goal? We could look at frequencies, percentages, or how many minutes, or how many meters, or how many pedaling cycle, if we're looking at a goal around bike riding, for example. Or mastery scores is something that's quite useful as well, especially if we're looking at a task that's got multiple steps. So you can transform pretty much any multi-step task into a mastery scores. At the beginning of the process, how many of those steps is the participant able to complete? And I'm thinking toileting, for example, the participant's able to do 3 out of 10 steps by themselves. And at the end of the process, they're able to do 6 out of 10 steps. So they're not fully independent with toileting, but we've clearly increased towards achieving our goals. So you guys will have lots of examples below that slide to refer to in the notes, which you'll get access after the presentation. Just a quick note around why it's so important. We talked about goal setting and self-efficacy earlier, why it's so important to set really good, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, relevant, and timely goal. If we have a good goal in place, the participant will feel confident about that goal. They're going to be positively, that the goal setting process will positively influence their confidence, which will be increased If they feel confident about the goal that they've set, they will likely feel more motivated to work towards that goal. Can't English. And if you have confidence and motivation from your participant, the chances of achieving that goals are much higher as well. And achieving a goal is sort of predictive of achieving future goals as well. You're going to reinforce that motivation, that confidence piece, because yes, I've done this one goal, I'm able to do future goal. Just as much as it's true for that positive cycle, it is also true if you set really poor goals. If you don't use SMART goals, you're going to have that negative influence on the confidence. The participants not really going to understand what needs to be achieved. They're going to have poor confidence in the process. Therefore, they're not going to feel really motivated, and the chances of achieving the goal is decreased. And not being successful with achieving one goal can be really unmotivating when thinking about setting future goals as well. So that first part here is the part that you have influence over. You can absolutely influence that process if it's going to be a positive reinforcement or positive feedback for these bubbles, or if it's going to be a negative feedback. So you've demonstrated in the chat today that we're in good hands. I think we're pretty skilled with setting SMART goals, but just wanted to touch on that and how goal setting can really influence that self-efficacy piece. All right, now that we've talked about the formulation and what the goal should look like, a goal is also a bit of an end product. So how do we get there? That's going to look a little bit different for different people. In the pediatric space, you guys have heard me talk about the funnel approach quite a fair bit, where the first conversation or the first draft of the support plan will very rarely leading to identifying the specific therapy goals. Usually further discussions and goal-specific assessments going to be needed, and we'll have that sort of back and forth of clarifying information until our destination is a little bit clearer. So we'll often start with general priorities, where the carer might say something along the lines of, I want to focus on toileting skills. And then you're just like, okay, the goal is toileting. And you go back, you think about it a little bit more, and you're just like, oh, but that's not specific enough. You go, and after a little bit more investigating and assessing or chatting with the family, you clarify that the goal is daytime urinary continence. And they're just like, okay, I'm good. And then you think about it a little bit, you're just like, oh, okay, that's not specific enough. You come back, you might do more specific assessments, and you and the parents could agree on some SMART goals along the line of, within a month, little Johnny will sit on the toilet 5 to 7 times per day when prompted by an adult and accompanied to the bathroom. So that could be an OT goal, for example. Or if I'm thinking of a speech goal, within a month, LG's parents and teachers will sign toilet when and use the script to prompt LJ to go to the toilet to support his receptive communication. Or in the psych space, we could work towards anxiety, or in the physio space, we could work towards the core strength to sit or to turn around and pull the peds down, or on the balance piece. So based on that funneling method, what the parents say is the goal is very rarely the therapeutic goal. They're usually going to come at that higher level of priority or general goal, and it's your job to funnel down and to keep refining and to keep having conversations until you're really clear and you're able to actually formulate a SMART goal that will guide your therapeutic process. There's going to be a couple other examples as well below the slide, but we'll just keep moving on as we are pretty much out of time.
I'll just touch on these briefly. And again, these are tools that are familiar, and we've covered them in other presentations as well. But I think Mary and I thought it was really important just to think about different models for goal setting or developing goals, because we all work slightly differently, and something that works for you may not work for me. So another couple of models to think about, the PEO model, which is obviously very familiar to most of our OTs, but definitely is available to other clinicians as well, really just focuses on the fact that what we do is we start with the occupational performance, what it is that we want to achieve, and then we work out from there what the goals are in each of those areas for the for the participant? Is it a goal around the person? Is there an environmental barrier that needs to be considered, or is it actually about the occupation themselves? So starting that breaking it down and covering the goal or covering the activity from different angles so that you're setting goals addressing the specific barrier. I've also included a diagram here or a picture of the ICF model, and for those that I saw in South Australia earlier in the week, this is a revision just a few days later. The ICF is a model that was put together by the World Health Organization. It's the International Classification of Function, and it is actually the model that the NDIS was built on. And it really, the point of the model is that it really demonstrates how everybody's experience of disability is different because it is influenced by all of those aspects of it. So we may start with one health condition / disability / diagnosis, but how that impacts each person will be very dependent upon other aspects. What part of the body function or body structures are impacted? What activities are they wanting to do? What do they want to participate in? And then there's also influence from environmental and personal factors. The red box around the activities and participation shows that this is where we're really working in the NDIS space, and this is often where goals start or are set. And if we just go to the next slide, we start to break down using that model how we can think about the different levels of goals or what goals we might be looking at in each of those areas. So again, without reading the whole slide, what we have here is 3 examples of different participants where we're looking at goals for them around at an impairment level, an activity level, and a participation level. So for example, the participation goal or the broad goal for Kylie might be that she wants to be able to participate in family birthday events by contributing a cake. The activity that she might need to achieve to do that is that she needs to be able to follow the recipe to bake the cake. If we're looking at an impairment model, we might be thinking she actually needs to be able to follow a 3-step written instruction. So we're really breaking it down and achieving those small goals. On the next slide, we'll see how the environment and personal factors will also need to be taken into consideration, and we may have goals around those areas as well. So environmentally for Kylie, it might be that due to her cognitive disability, we actually have some issues around organisation, and so actually supporting her to better organise her kitchen so that she can easily locate the items that she needs. That goal might actually, be one of the first steps towards her being more independent in participating in the birthday event. And again, with the personal goals, this is where we need to think about the person's other things that are available to the people. So the different support people they have in their life. Do they have a lot of informal supports? No informal supports? Are they in a city? Are they in a regional or remote area? And that will influence how a goal might be set there. Then, Mary, I can't remember whether you were doing this or I was doing this one.
I was asking myself the same question.
You can tell it's Friday afternoon.
Let's just wrap it up. We're out of time anyway. But we just wanted to touch on the documentation process and really thinking about the importance of the goal setting piece and how it should really follow all the different documents that we are having to use for NDIS. So if we think about the first step of the process, it will be that support plan. So when you're doing that goal setting, it's really that clinical agreements between yourself and the participant on how the funding will be used during the sessions. And we've mentioned earlier how all files with ongoing interventions should have support plans on them, single therapy or single discipline or multidisciplinary files. All the files with ongoing sessions should have a support plan and should highlight what you are working towards. That is basically what's dictating your therapeutic process with this participant. As you are having sessions with the participant, you are using the session summaries, where your session summary should highlight what goal you're working towards, what's been done during the session to work on that goal, and what are the next steps, what worked, what didn't work, and what are the next steps for you to continue working on this goal. And after multiple sessions, that leads us to a progress report towards the end of the plan period, where we should have, once again, the goals that were agreed on in the support plan for us to highlight what have we done, where are we at, have we achieved the goals, are they ongoing, are they partially achieved, or are they not a priority anymore? This should really be the base of how we report to NDIS, because that's what they excuse me, that's what they are funding us for, to work towards those goals. So that should be really the element that is triggering the whole documentation piece and allowing you to stay centered on the goals when you are writing that piece. Anything else you know from that?
Yeah, I'm just going to do a little plug. We did do a session in All Things NDIS last week on documentation, where we spent a lot more time going into detail on this, and the recording will be available soon on the internet. So again, watch out in the next edition of Aspire for details around that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. I think we are pretty much at time. Before everybody is leaving, I'm going to put another little quick survey, guys. I know we are
we're pushing it now, Mary.
We're pushing it with 2 surveys, but if you can all fill that out, that would be massively appreciated. It's good for us to have that feedback. If you have any questions, or if you want to share a couple takeaway points, we have a few more minutes. We're happy to stay online. We know that some of you guys have to go, but we're happy to stay on for a couple more minutes if you want to share what you got out of that session, or if you have any questions.
Everybody's going to go and make a cuppa before the town hall, I think, Mary.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, team.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, team. Thank you very much.